"The only way to survive this cold is to hug me," said the cowboy to the Apache woman. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Night fell fast over the high plains, and with it came a storm that didn't care who lived or died. Snow rolled across the land in thick sheets. The wind roared hard enough to shake fences and tear loose boards from anything not built to last. Temperatures dropped so low that even a few minutes exposed could burn skin and numb fingers until they stopped working. Graham Calder, a 38-year-old rancher, rode through that storm with his head down, guiding his horse along a line he knew well, his property boundary. He had spent most of the year patrolling this land, checking fences, clearing brush, and making sure rustlers kept their distance. He lived alone, by choice, after years of serving as a scout during the war. He'd seen too much death, too many civilians treated as targets in a conflict they never asked to be part of. His younger brother died in a raid years back, and Graham blamed himself for not being there when it happened. Since then, staying alone felt safer. If he didn't let anyone in, he couldn't fail them. Tonight wasn't about duty, it was survival. He had a small line cabin ahead, just sturdy enough to protect him and the horse until the storm eased. Every step the horse took was slow, hooves sinking into deep snow, breathing loud through the cold. Graham's shoulders ached from the wind, hitting him again and again. The leather reins were stiff as wire in his hands. He kept moving because stopping meant freezing. He scanned the fence posts through narrowed eyes, ready to reach shelter when something didn't fit the landscape. A shape hunched against the fence line, human-sized, moving. Graham's stomach tightened as he pulled the reins and stopped. He reached for the rifle strapped to his saddle, not to aim, but to keep ready. Men sometimes faked injury to draw others in. He watched the shape fight to stand and then collapse again. Her hair blew across her face, long and black, stuck to her skin with ice. Her dress looked torn from struggle, ripped across the chest and thigh. She wore no coat. Bare skin showed through tears in the fabric. The snow stuck to her like she had been out there too long already. Graham's instinct told him to help. His experience warned him to be careful. But leaving her meant death. There wasn't a doubt about that. He approached slowly, boots sinking deep, hands visible so she could see he wasn't coming to harm her. When she noticed him, panic struck her eyes so sharply he felt it in his chest. She backed against the fence post, trying to pull the torn fabric higher to cover herself, though her fingers barely worked. She looked ready to try running again, even if her legs couldn't support her weight. "Easy," Graham said, breath fogging in the air. "I'm not here to hurt you." She tried to form a word, but her teeth chattered too hard. She was freezing, skin pale under the bronze tone, lips cracked and losing color. Every second mattered now. He took off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. She flinched from the touch at first, like she expected pain. Then, when the coat began to trap what little heat she had left, her knees gave out and Graham caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. Hunger and running had stripped her down to bone and desperate strength. He lifted her into his arms, feeling her tense, not from cold but from fear, and he carried her toward the cabin without another word. The door blew open with his shoulder, the hinges protesting the force. Inside wasn't warm, but it was a barrier against wind and snow. Graham lowered her near the cold stove, moving with care, giving her space when he stepped back. He started a fire quickly. Sparks caught fast because he kept dry, kindling ready for nights like this. As the flames grew, the cabin lit enough to see the reality of her condition clearly. Her dress was Apache-made, deerskin adorned with beads and fringe, beautiful once, but now torn from being grabbed or dragged. A bandage around her thigh had frozen to the cut beneath it, blood dried black from exposure. She kept the blanket and his coat clutched tight at her chest, trying to hide exposed skin. She watched his every move with wide, alert eyes. He recognized the look, someone who'd been cornered and learned not to trust men with any power over them. He offered water first. She struggled to lift it with shaking hands. He helped steady it, and she forced a few swallows down, coughing afterward. Food came next, thin strips of jerky. She sniffed it like she wasn't sure if accepting meant something she didn't want to give. After a long silence, she whispered her name. Nia. Her voice sounded scraped raw. Graham nodded once. I'm Graham. You're safe here. Just warm up. No one will lay a hand on you. Her eyes narrowed a little at that promise. She wanted to believe him, but her past clearly taught her that safety was usually a lie before more pain. As the fire strengthened, Graham removed his gloves and stretched his fingers near the heat. He stayed several feet away, letting her have space. She curled her legs under the blanket, trying not to reveal more of her body than she had to. The ripped neckline still showed more than she wanted, and her cheeks flushed with self-consciousness and fear. Graham stared at the fire instead of her. He respected what she was trying to protect. He thought about what could have happened to her. Who chased her? How far she had run, and whether they were still looking. He listened to the wind slam against the cabin walls and made a mental note to check for tracks at first light. For now, he had two priorities. Keep her alive. Keep the cabin secure. Nia shivered again, even with the blanket and coat. The storm outside worsened. The walls creaked. The temperature kept falling. Graham knew a hard truth. If she stayed wrapped alone in that blanket all night, she might still freeze. The cold slipped through walls like a silent enemy. He didn't say anything yet. He knew how that request, sharing body heat, would sound to a woman already terrified of what men wanted. He would wait until the moment came where saying nothing was no longer an option. Nia's eyelids drooped from exhaustion, but each time her body relaxed, a nightmare seemed to jolt her awake again. She hugged her knees closer, eyes on the door, expecting someone to come through it. Graham sat against the wall, watching over her, jaw tight. He hadn't planned on saving anyone tonight. He just wanted to get out of the storm and wake up alive in the morning. But now, someone else's life sat in his hands. As the fire flickered and the wind kept pushing hard against the timber, the night forced them to share a space neither of them expected, with a future neither could predict. And though neither said it out loud, one thing was already clear. They would survive the storm together, or not at all. The fire snapped and spit as it settled into steady heat. But even with flames working hard, the air inside the cabin stayed sharp with cold. Graham sat with his back to the wall, keeping his distance from Nia so she wouldn't feel cornered. She held the blanket and his coat close around her chest, breathing quick like she expected danger even here. He didn't blame her. She didn't know him. All she had ever known from men lately was fear. He watched her hands. They shook not only from the cold, but from nerves. He needed to earn something from her now, trust, or enough of it to keep her alive until morning. How long were you out there? He asked, voice low, no judgment in it. She looked at the door again, then at him, then at the fire. Her answer came slow. 2 days, maybe 3. I ran. No food. Her throat bobbed once. Men chasing me. That confirmed what he suspected. He'd seen the rope marks on her wrists when she adjusted the blanket. Not fresh, but not old either. Someone tied her up at some point. Someone took more than survival from her. Graham swallowed hard, careful not to let anger show. Men built like him didn't get to show anger around people who feared them. It felt too close to threat. Why were they after you? He asked, because the question was necessary. If those men came back, he needed to know what they wanted. Nia stared into the fire like she might find courage there. Blamed me, she whispered, said I stole from Trading Post. I didn't. Her voice cracked as she shifted, adjusting the blanket over the torn dress that revealed more than she wanted him to see. She looked ashamed. Graham looked away, giving her the respect stolen from her somewhere out on the trail. She curled her knees tighter. They laughed, said I was pretty enough to sell. Her voice broke on that last word. Graham's jaw clenched so hard he felt something in it protest. He kept his hands still on the floor beside him because if he moved too quickly, she might think it was toward her. He forced air out slow. No one is selling you. Not while I'm breathing. The tone was level, but the promise inside it was stone. Outside, the wind slammed the cabin again. The boards rattled like they were one bad gust from tearing loose. Graham stood and checked the shutters. Snow had pushed in through a small split in the window frame. He packed a strip of cloth in a gap so the cold wouldn't chew at them harder. When he turned back, Nia was struggling to hold still. The violent shivers were returning, her body shutting down now that she wasn't running for her life. "You're freezing again," he said, voice calm but firm. He grabbed the second blanket from the cot and sat down beside her a little closer than before. "We need to share heat. If we don't, you might not wake up." She tensed instantly, blanket gripped like a shield. Fear shot through her eyes, wide and alert. He stopped there, gave her time. "I'm not asking anything else from you," he said clearly. "Just warmth. That's all." His hands never lifted toward her. He waited. Nia's breath hitched. She looked at her own hands, trembling and weak. She looked at the door like she was thinking about running again. Then she looked at the fire, understanding it wasn't enough. Finally, she nodded once, small but deliberate. He opened the blanket gently. She moved toward him slow, every inch a decision. When her shoulder touched his chest, she flinched. He didn't tighten his hold. He let her adjust. She leaned her forehead briefly against his collarbone, as if testing whether he would take the chance to dominate her. He didn't move. After a long moment, she let herself relax only a little. Graham wrapped the blanket around them both, sealing them together against the cold. Her breathing was fast. He could feel her heart pounding through the coat, and he kept his voice steady. "Just breathe. You're safe." She whispered something he barely heard. "Safe for how long?" The question hit him like a weight he didn't know how to lift. He took a slow breath before answering. "As long as you stay here, and as long as I'm alive, no one will hurt you." Gradually, her trembling lessened. Her fingers loosened their grip on the blanket. Her head rested heavier against his chest. The tension in her shoulders softened. Graham stayed awake, listening to every sound outside. He didn't know how many men were after her. He didn't know if they were tracking her trail right now. But he knew one thing clearly. If they came through that door, they would face him first. And they would not win. Nia's breathing steadied. Survival had bought her a moment of peace. Graham wasn't sure when he had last felt that himself. He stared at the fire, wide awake, arms carefully around the woman who had stumbled into his life with terror in her eyes and enemies on her heels. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for now, in this storm, they had one mission. Make it to morning. Alive. Together. The wind continued to batter the cabin long after Nia's trembling eased. Graham stayed awake, holding her only as tightly as she needed to stay warm, his eyes fixed on the fire. Every sound outside mattered. He listened for hooves, for voices, for anything that might suggest her pursuers weren't far behind. Nothing came through the storm but the howl of winter pressing against the walls. Nia shifted once in her sleep, her hand fisting weakly into the fabric of his shirt, like some part of her still feared waking alone. Graham kept still, letting her rest, though his back ached from the stiff position and his own exhaustion pulled heavy at him. It wasn't the first time he'd forfeited sleep to keep someone safe. But this time was different. This wasn't a soldier beside him. This was a woman who had been hunted like prey. After a while, she stirred awake, breath catching for a second as she remembered where she was. Her eyes darted around the dim cabin until they met his. "You still here?" she whispered, almost surprised. "Still here," he answered. Her voice was steadier than earlier, but her eyes still carried caution, like she expected the world to turn on her at any moment. "How far from town?" she asked. "Day's ride," he said. "Maybe more with weather like this. Closest place with law is Stillwater." He paused, then added what mattered most. "No one gets to you there without going through me first." She took that in quietly. There were questions in her eyes, about him, about why he lived out here alone, but she didn't ask them yet. Instead, she glanced at the bandage on her thigh. The cloth was soaked stiff. Infection worried Graham more than cold now. "Can I take a look at that?" he asked. She hesitated. He saw her weighing risk against necessity. Slowly, she nodded. He sat forward and kept his hands visible until she gave permission to touch. When he peeled the cloth away, she drew a sharp breath. The wound was deeper than he hoped, torn from running or something worse before she escaped. It was red and inflamed. Not fatal now, but it could be if ignored. "I need to clean it properly," he said. "I've got supplies." "It'll hurt," but it'll stop getting worse. Her jaw tightened. Do it. He worked carefully with warm water and a small bottle of whiskey he usually saved for nights colder than this. She hissed with pain, but didn't pull away. Graham saw scars beneath the torn fabric, old ones that told stories she would avoid telling. His breath hardened in his chest. Whoever had chased her had no right to breathe another day. When he finished and wrapped a clean bandage around her thigh, she let out a shaky exhale. "Thank you," she murmured. He gave a small nod and leaned back, giving her space again. For the first time, she looked at him with something other than fear. Maybe not trust yet, but the start of something close. "You said you had a brother," she said, voice careful. Graham's shoulders stiffened. He rarely spoke about the past. "He died in a raid," he said. "Good man. Didn't deserve what he got." His eyes stayed on the fire. "After that, I figured it was better to keep people away than risk letting anyone down again." Nia watched him, studying the weight he carried. "You did not let me down," she said softly. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw strength beneath her exhaustion. She had survived what would have broken most people. She wasn't just running, she was refusing to give in. The wind outside eased a little, the storm not done but tiring. Graham stood and checked the door and window again. The snow packed high against the frame, blocking most of the outside world. It made the cabin feel smaller, but safer too. "Once the storm breaks," he said, "we'll head to my ranch house. There's a better stove, real food, and a bed you can heal in." Her eyes widened slightly, worry flickering. "What if they find us?" "Then they'll find a man ready to fight," he replied, voice firm. Nia pulled the blanket around her shoulders, but no longer like a shield, more like comfort. Her gaze stayed on him, and this time she didn't look away in fear. "Why risk yourself?" she asked. Graham didn't hesitate this time. "Because someone should have saved you before I did," he said. "And I'm not making that mistake twice." Silence settled again, not tense now, but cautious and gentle. They were two people trying to relearn how to breathe in a world that had taken too much from them. Nia slowly leaned closer on her own, not for survival, not because she had no choice, but because for the first time in a long while, she felt safer beside someone than she did alone. Graham led her, and his arm settled naturally around her shoulders. No demand, no claim. The fire burned steady. The storm's rage drifted farther away. Together, they waited for dawn, alive, aware, and no longer strangers in the dark. Morning finally pushed through the storm like a slow fight, gray light bleeding across the frosted window. The wind had calmed, but cold still held strong, the kind that could kill a person who underestimated it. Graham stretched his back gently, so he wouldn't disturb Nia. She had fallen asleep, leaning into him, breathing steady and warm against his chest. It was the first time he'd seen her face without fear tightening every muscle. He eased away, laying the blanket carefully around her. She stirred but didn't flinch. Progress. He grabbed his coat, now thawed and dry, and stepped outside to check what the storm might have delivered. Snowdrift piled high along the fence line, but something else caught his attention. Tracks. Not animal. Hoofprints. 3, maybe 4 horses. They hadn't reached the cabin, but they'd been close enough for a man with sense to worry. He crouched, fingers brushing over the fresh indentations. They were made the night before. Men had ridden searching in the storm. Whoever hunted Nia had not turned back because of a little cold. Graham's jaw tightened. He scanned the horizon. Nothing but white hills and bare trees. They could be anywhere. Inside, Nia sat upright, blanket around her shoulders, eyes searching his face the moment he shut the door. "Someone was here?" she asked, reading his expression too well. "They didn't find us," he said, setting his rifle near the stove. "But they were close." He didn't sugarcoat it. She deserved truth, not comfort that would break later. Fear flashed across her face, but she swallowed it. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They think selling me pays better than catching a thief." Graham nodded once. He'd known men like that in the war. Men who treated human life like spare coins. "Then we'll ride as soon as the horse can push through the drifts," he said. "My ranch is farther, harder to reach, and safer." Nia looked at him, uncertain. "Why help me this much? You don't know me." "I didn't know the men who killed my brother either," Graham answered, voice steady. Sometimes not knowing is reason enough. That made her eyes soften, a small shift, but one that mattered. He boiled water and handed her a tin cup. She was still guarded, but she no longer shrank away from his hands. Eating was slow. She chewed like every bite had to be considered, like food was something she wasn't used to trusting either. "You ever been to Stillwater?" Graham asked, trying to settle her nerves and gather what might help them later. "Yes," she said quietly. "Worked there, sewing, mending clothes. Some treated me fair." Her eyes lowered. "Some not." That was all she said, but it was enough for him to understand more than she'd ever want to explain. After breakfast, Graham checked the bandage on her leg. She winced but didn't pull away. The swelling hadn't worsened. Good sign. She could ride if she had to. He also gave her a pair of wool socks from a spare kit. She stared at them, touched by something that threatened to show on her face before she masked it again. "You don't have to pay me back," he said before she could speak. "You staying alive is enough." She studied him long, as if searching for a hidden price. When she didn't find one, she nodded with quiet acceptance. They prepared the cabin quickly, packing food, securing what they couldn't take. Nia was slower with movement, but she insisted on helping, insisting she could stand on her own. Pride wasn't stubbornness in her. It was survival. Before they saddled the horse, Graham passed her a folded wool scarf. Her fingers paused halfway through unfolding it. "For your hair," he said, "and warm your face. Helps against the wind." She wrapped it carefully. It covered most of her hair and part of her cheek, a disguise minimal but helpful. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "but I go." He helped her onto the horse, then climbed up behind her, holding the reins while keeping one steady arm around her waist. She didn't tense this time when he touched her. She leaned slightly into him when the wind hit. As they moved away from the cabin through the deep snow, Nia whispered something he barely heard, her voice small but filled with steel beneath pain. "They killed 2 others like me," she said. "I ran. I was lucky." Graham looked at the horizon, cold air cutting into his lungs. "You survived," he said. "Not luck. Strength." Nia didn't answer, but she stayed close, her hand clutching his arm. Not from fear alone, but from the instinct to hold on to something that felt solid. The cabin shrank behind them. Ahead was danger, bitter cold, and a trail that could expose them if those men returned. But there was also a ranch waiting, a place Graham hadn't thought of as home in years. Now, maybe it could become one for both of them. With each step through the snow-covered land, one truth settled quietly between them. They weren't riding apart from the world anymore. They were riding toward a future together. Snow-laden branches sagged low as Graham guided the horse through deep drifts, his arm firm around Nia's waist to steady her. The storm had left a silent world behind. No birds, no drifting dust, only the faint creak of ice under hooves and the distant whistle of wind receding toward the mountains. The temperature was still vicious, cold cutting through layered clothes and biting skin anywhere left exposed. Graham could feel Nia shiver each time a gust slipped under the scarf wrapped around her neck. He kept scanning the ridges and low draws, counting blind spots, paying attention to anything that didn't belong. The tracks he found earlier stayed heavy on his mind. Men searching in that storm meant they were desperate or dangerous enough not to care about dying while chasing a prize. "We don't stop long," he said quietly, leaning close so she could hear over the horse's breathing. "We can rest when we reach the ranch house." Nia nodded, but her grip on his arm tightened. The wound on her thigh made her body stiff each time the horse lurched. She bit down on her pain without complaint. That told him more about her strength than anything she had said so far. The land sloped downward into a shallow basin. Graham slowed the horse and studied the terrain. Wide open space with scattered trees near the frozen creek and far beyond. Fencing that meant the ranch wasn't far. Relief brushed his chest, but he didn't allow comfort to settle. Safety wasn't guaranteed yet. Nia leaned closer to him as the cold got under her blanket again. He felt her worry building, not because of the weather, but because she didn't know what kind of life waited ahead. "How many live with you?" she asked. "No one," he answered. "Not anymore." She turned her chin slightly, trying to read the meaning behind the simple words. You said you keep people away. Some men lose more than they can carry, he replied. So they carry nothing at all. Her eyes lowered, but not in fear, understanding. She didn't push for details about his brother again. It was enough that she now understood his silence wasn't coldness. It was grief. They crossed the frozen creek carefully. The horse's hooves cracked the thin ice, but it held. Snow glared in every direction, dazzling and disorienting. Nia rubbed her fingers along his coat, sleeve to keep feeling in them. Graham noticed and adjusted the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her back pressed fully against his chest. No hesitation now. You said they killed 2 other women like you, he said after a long pause. His voice stayed soft, so the question didn't reopen wounds too harshly. Why you? Why did they want to profit off you instead? Nia swallowed hard. Her voice came quiet. One fought. They shot her. The other tried to run before me. They caught her, dragged her back. She blinked quickly, fighting the memory. I did not fight at first. They thought I was easier to control. Graham felt something hot flare in his chest, a strike of anger so strong his grip on the reins tightened until his knuckles hurt. He reminded himself not to let her see rage, not that kind. She needed calm. You did what you had to do to survive, he said. That isn't weakness. Nia's breath came steadier after that. She didn't thank him because survival wasn't something to be grateful for. It was something you fought for. As they continued on, the sky cleared a little more, showing pale blue behind the thinning gray. Graham recognized landmarks now. Old fence posts he'd repaired after spring floods. The lone cottonwood struck by lightning last summer. They were almost home, but the land wasn't empty. Just as they reached the rise before the ranch, Graham spotted tracks crossing their path, fresh, heading west from the opposite direction. He halted the horse and studied them. 2 horses, riders, heavy weight in the saddle. Not ranch hands. No one worked these pastures but him. Nia stiffened when she realized what he was looking at. Them. He didn't lie. Could be. His throat tightened. We'll move slower. Quiet. He guided the horse off the obvious trail, weaving through brush and around the backside of a hay shed that stood near his property line. He kept one hand near the revolver holstered at his hip. Snow crunched softly under hooves. A controlled rhythm, he prayed, wouldn't draw attention. The ranch house finally came into view, wood walls standing strong against years of harsh seasons, smoke chimney waiting for fire. A place that once held laughter and arguments and the noise of normal life. A place that had gone quiet when his brother died. Graham always thought the silence was easier. Now it felt too empty. He helped Nia down from the horse, careful of her injured leg. She leaned heavily on him, but she didn't hide her unsteadiness. That was its own form of trust. He guided her into the house, pushing the door shut behind them and barring it with a thick beam. Inside, the house smelled of dryness and stored wood. No fire yet, no warmth, but solid walls and supplies that would give them a fighting chance. Graham moved quickly, lighting a lantern, stacking wood into the stove, striking a match. Flames caught, and heat began to build slowly. Nia lowered herself into the chair nearest the stove, wrapping the blanket closer. This your home, she said, voice softer than before. It's a roof and a stove, he replied. Home comes later. She studied him, really studied him, and he saw a question behind her eyes. Was he planning to send her away once she healed? Would she be alone again after she finally found safety? Graham sat across from her, letting the fire reflect off his tired eyes. You stay here as long as you need, he said before she could ask. If those men come, they'll meet me. Not you. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but words didn't come. Instead, she reached out, hesitant but brave, and set her hand on the table between them, close enough that he could have taken it if he wanted. He didn't, not yet. Instead, he placed his hand near hers, an inch apart, close enough to show he wouldn't leave, far enough to respect every boundary she still held. You saved me, she whispered. No, he answered. You save yourself. I'm just making sure you get the chance to keep doing it. Outside, the land lay silent beneath the cold blue sky. Danger still walked somewhere in those hills. But inside the ranch house, Warmth grew, and fear loosened its grip. For the first time in a long while, Graham wasn't surviving alone, and Nia wasn't running anymore. The fight wasn't over. The storm wasn't finished. But together, they were stronger than anything coming for them. The fire in the ranch house stove steadily spread heat into the room, melting away the memory of the brutal night they had survived. Graham watched Nia closely, noticing how she hugged the blanket less for fear and more for comfort now. But he knew rest would be short. Those tracks outside, the ones he saw cutting across his land, they could mean trouble arriving soon. He placed a tin plate of beans and warm bread on the table. Nia's eyes followed every move, still not fully convinced that food didn't come with a price. She hesitated before eating, her fingers brushing the crust slowly, as if reminding herself it was real, that this moment of safety wasn't a dream that would crack open into more terror. She ate fast at first, then slowed when her body reminded her not to overdo it after days of starvation. Graham sat, stretching his stiff legs beneath the table. "We'll stay here a few days at least," he said. "You need to heal enough to run if things go bad." He kept his voice low but serious. Nia didn't look scared this time. She looked determined. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. He respected that, but he also knew survival meant choosing battles wisely. "Running isn't weakness," he said. "Sometimes it's the smartest thing a person can do." Nia studied him like she was still trying to understand the kind of man he was. Then she asked a question he didn't expect. "Why were you riding alone yesterday? Storm like that, most stay inside." He didn't answer right away. The truth was complicated. "Most days I prefer the quiet," he said finally. "No one to watch fail. No one to worry about losing." His gaze drifted to the window, where the snow outside glowed bright with morning light. "My brother is buried behind that barn. Since then, I keep distance from things that can break me again." Nia lowered her eyes, but not out of pity, out of understanding. "Loss makes the heart hard," she whispered. "Mine became stone for a long time." He didn't ask what she had lost. The way she looked into the fire told enough. After breakfast, Graham helped her up with careful hands. She leaned into him, testing her weight on the injured leg. The pain flared in her face, but her voice stayed steady. "I can stand." "You can, but don't push it more than needed," he replied. He walked her to the bed near the back wall. A real mattress, blankets piled thick. Nia sat slowly, running her palm across the fabric like she was afraid it might vanish. "You sleep here," Graham said. "And you?" she asked quickly. He pointed to the small cot by the stove. "I'll be close, in case anything happens." She nodded, but didn't argue. The bed was clearly meant for a woman. He offered no explanation for why it was still made with care after years alone. She could guess. It belonged to someone gone, someone whose memory hung like a quiet shadow in the house. Nia settled in, adjusting the blanket over her legs. Her breathing slowed, exhaustion tugging at her eyelids. When Graham stepped back, she spoke again, this time her voice small, uncertain. "You won't leave me?" He turned, brows pulling slightly at the worry behind her words. "I don't leave people," he said. "Not anymore." She relaxed at that. Trust building a brick at a time. Graham spent the afternoon repairing the shed door and checking the fencing near the ranch house. He didn't stray far enough that Nia couldn't call for him. Fresh snow made tracking easy. If those riders circled back, he'd know right away. Each task he did with purpose, making sure the horse was sheltered, sharpening tools, stacking firewood. Protection wasn't only about guns, it was about being ready for a long fight or a long winter. Inside, Nia slept most of the day, recovering strength she hadn't had in weeks. But each time she woke, she'd glance toward the window, listening for hooves or voices. The fear wasn't gone, it just didn't own her anymore. When evening came, Graham returned to find her awake, sitting up as the firelight painted her skin in gold. The scarf was still at her neck, but her hair had dried, long strands falling across her shoulder. This time, she wasn't hiding behind the blanket. She watched him enter, and something new flickered in her eyes. Not fear, not suspicion. A kind of hope trying to take its first breath. "I owe you much," she said. "You owe me nothing," he replied. "You surviving is enough." She shook her head. Not many risk themselves for my people. He understood what she meant. Settlers and Apache lives rarely crossed without violence or suspicion. But Graham had long stopped believing in sides. He believed in surviving with dignity and making sure others did too if he could. I don't care who you are, he said plainly, or where you come from. You needed help. I was there. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't the heavy kind that reminded them of what they'd lost. It was quieter, warmer. Later, when the night deepened, Nia shifted under the blankets, pulling them closer to her chin. She looked toward the cot where Graham sat, cleaning his rifle. Snow tapped the window faintly. The stove clicked as the fire settled. You think they come? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I think men who treat women like property don't give up easy, he said, equally honest. Her eyes didn't widen in fear this time. They hardened with resolve. Then let them. I'm done being a thing to take. Graham felt something tighten in his chest. Respect. He set the rifle down and leaned back in the chair, watching over her. Her head lowered to the pillow, and though worry lingered around her eyes, she drifted towards sleep. Her breathing evened out. She wasn't running tonight. She wasn't hiding in the dark alone. Graham kept his gaze on the window, listening for anything the snow might hide. If danger showed, he would stand between it and her. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the trail between the cabin and home, his mission had changed. He wasn't just helping a stranger anymore. He was protecting someone who needed him, someone he would not lose. Night pressed heavy against the ranch house windows again. The wind wasn't as violent as the storm before, but the cold outside still threatened anyone foolish enough to stay uncovered. Inside, the fire gave steady warmth, and the room glowed dimly with orange flickers jumping along the walls. Graham sat awake on the cot, rifle cleaned and ready beside him. Nia slept deeper than the night before, but every once in a while she clenched the blanket as if a nightmare tugged on her mind. He never looked away for long. Hours passed. Graham's eyes burned with exhaustion, but he didn't let himself rest fully. Too much depended on staying alert. Too much rode on keeping the promise he made to her. Finally, just as dawn hinted with a thin line of gray across the snow outside, Nia stirred awake. She pushed herself upright slowly, wincing a little from the wound in her thigh. Her dark hair fell around her face, and she scanned the room until her eyes found him, and some small tension eased from her shoulders. You did not sleep, she said quietly. I rested, he answered, not mentioning how little. Needed to make sure no one came. She studied him longer than before, her gaze holding a mix of respect and something gentler that she didn't know how to show yet. You keep watch for me, she said. Not a question. I keep watch for both of us, he replied. He helped her stand, careful with her leg, and she didn't pull away when his hand supported her back. She was remembering what trust felt like piece by fragile piece. He guided her to the table where he'd set out breakfast, eggs fried in a cast-iron pan, leftover bread, and hot coffee. Simple but real. She ate slow, every bite a reminder that survival was no longer a desperate fight. While she ate, Graham stepped in and out of the house, checking for new tracks. Nothing fresh yet, but the fear wasn't gone. It sat like a shadow along the fence line. Inside again, he found Nia watching the stove flames. If they come back, she said carefully, you should not fight for me. I don't want you dead because of me. Graham leaned against the wall, folding his arms. I don't plan on dying, he said, and if they show up, they'll regret riding this far. Nia lowered her gaze. They hunt for profit, not justice. I've seen men like that, Graham answered. They take because they think no one can stop them. Then he stepped closer to her, voice steady. They found the wrong ranch. Nia took a deeper breath, drawing strength from the words more than she expected. Then a new worry flickered in her eyes, the same one she had avoided asking since arriving. Once I heal, do I need to leave? Graham froze for half a second. He understood the fear behind that question better than she realized. Being unwanted, being alone again, being thrown back into a world where survival wasn't guaranteed. You stay as long as you want, he said. No deadline, no conditions. Her lips parted slightly, surprise softening her entire face. She wasn't used to choices. or kindness without cost. To shift the weight of that moment, Graham nodded toward her bandaged leg. We should change that bandage. She let him help her to the bed again. He untied the wrapping slowly, careful not to cause pain. The wound had begun to close. Still tender, but healing well. Looks better, he said. You're getting stronger. Nia exhaled in relief. For the first time, she didn't flinch away when he touched her. Her muscles stayed loose, trusting his care instead of fearing it. Silence grew thick between them. Not uncomfortable, just full of thoughts neither dared to say. She held his gaze longer, searching his face as though trying to memorize safety. I can help here, she said. Work, cook, clean. I don't want to be a burden. Graham shook his head. You're not. But she pushed softly. It makes me feel alive to do something. To not hide. He respected that. He understood how work could give purpose when fear stole everything else. If you're up for it, you can help with the chickens later, he said. They need tending. Her lips tugged into something close to a smile. A small, uncertain one, but real. I can do that. Graham nodded once, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't let himself feel in years. The day moved slowly but safely. Nia stayed inside near the stove, practicing walking with more weight on her leg. Graham stayed close, bringing wood inside, checking the barn, watching the ridges. Every few minutes his eyes would find her again, alive, recovering, transforming from someone hunted into someone rebuilding. Late afternoon came with a thin pink light stretching across the snow. Nia stood by the window, one hand against the frame, watching the fields quietly. Your land is big, she said. Too big for one man, Graham admitted. She glanced at him over her shoulder. Now too, she said simply. That truth landed heavier in him than she might have intended. As evening thickened, Graham lit the lanterns. Nia moved slower now, exhaustion from pushing her recovery showing in her steps. She sat by the fire again, pulling her blanket around her, but no longer shrinking inside it. You saved my life twice, she said suddenly. First from the cold, second from fear. Graham didn't speak right away. Some compliments were too sharp. They cut into old wounds before healing them. You save your own life by not giving up, he said. I just help you keep going. She reached her hand out again like the night before. This time he met it halfway. Their fingers brushed, then lay slow and careful. Her skin was warm, alive. I want to live, she whispered. You are, he replied. She looked up at him, eyes reflecting firelight and something deeper than either of them expected at the start of this storm. And I want to stay with you. His chest tightened, not with fear, but something he hadn't felt since before his brother died. You stay, he said. No one takes you from here. Outside, the last of the daylight faded. Shadows stretched long and dark across fresh snow. Somewhere out in that quiet expanse, dangerous men might still be riding. But inside the ranch house, trust was growing. Strength was building. They were no longer just two strangers thrown together by winter. They were becoming something that could stand against whatever was coming next. The next morning broke with clear skies, sun reflecting across the snow like white-hot glass. It looked peaceful, too peaceful, the kind of quiet that made men like Graham uneasy because danger liked silence just as much as cold did. He checked the rifle again, then set it on the table where he could reach it fast. Nia stood beside the window, balancing on her stronger leg, one hand resting lightly on the frame. She watched him as he moved around the house, preparing for whatever might come. You think they're near? She asked. I think they're looking, he replied. Men like that don't stop after one storm. Nia's jaw tightened. She nodded like someone who refused to be prey ever again. Graham stepped outside to haul in more firewood before the sun weakened. Nia insisted on helping. He didn't want her in the cold long, but she looked determined. She wrapped the scarf tight and limped carefully out into the snow. He walked beside her, ready to catch her if she slipped. Outside the ranch house, the world looked wide and empty, but Graham's eyes picked out details most would miss. Tracks leading away from the road, older ones from him and Nia arriving. No new prints, not yet. That meant time, not safety. Nia bent to grab a short log and gasped softly when her thigh pulled too much. Graham stepped in automatically, steadying her elbow. She didn't pull away. She looked grateful and not ashamed. That told him how far she'd come. Back inside, she helped stack the logs. Her breath came short, but she kept at it until the task was done. Graham watched her sit down, pushing hair back from her face. Even tired, there was fire in her eyes, willpower and something else, belonging. "You're healing faster than I expected," he said. "Stubbornness helps." Her lips twitched. "Where I come from, stopping means death." He took a seat opposite her, boots stretched toward the stove's heat. "Where you come from?" he asked. He realized he knew almost nothing about her life before fear carved her path. Nia looked into the fire, choosing her words slowly. "My family lived near the canyonlands. We moved with seasons, hunting, gathering, trading. Not many of my people left now near the towns." Her breath thinned. Settlers took the water. Soldiers took the rest. Graham stayed silent. He'd seen that truth himself during the war, and the shame still burned. "I worked in Stillwater after," she continued, "sewing for women who mocked me when they thought I didn't hear." She shook her head, but her voice stayed steady. "Every day, I saved coin to leave, to start again. When the coins were stolen, they blamed me. They said I was an Apache thief. Those men took me to sell." Her hands tightened around the blanket, knuckles whitening, but her gaze stayed strong. "I ran because I want my life, not because I fear losing it." Graham felt something shift inside him, a protective heat, fierce and certain. "Nobody takes your life from you," he said. "Not while I'm here." She looked up at him, really looked, and he saw trust form into something deeper. Hours passed quietly. Graham showed her how to refill the lantern oil and where the tools were kept. Small routines that made the place feel less like a shelter and more like a home that she was learning. As afternoons stretched long, Graham went to check the barn. The horse was restless, shifting more than usual. Graham listened to the wind. No, not wind. A faint metallic jingle, tack on a saddle. His breath stilled. Someone out there. He returned inside fast, shutting the door without a sound. Nia felt the change in him instantly. "They're close," she whispered. Graham grabbed the rifle, voice low. "Get to the bedroom and stay down. If the door opens and it's not me, you take the revolver from under the pillow and you shoot." Nia's breathing quickened, but she nodded. No panic, not like before. She disappeared into the back room. Graham stood near the stove, rifle in hand, body angled to protect the interior. His heart pounded steady, not frantic. He had seen worse. He had survived worse. Hoof steps, slow, cautious. One rider, maybe two. A silhouette crossed the kitchen window, then paused. Someone peered inside. Graham didn't move. A stiff knock rattled the door. Not panicked, not polite. The knock of a man expecting submission. "We're tracking someone," a voice called. "Apache woman. She's property of men in Stillwater. Reward if found." Graham's grip tightened. He didn't open the door. "You're on private land," he said. "Nothing for you here." Another pause. Then boots crunched in fresh snow, moving toward the window again. The voice came quieter, uglier. "We know she's with you. You ain't keeping her." Graham stepped forward, letting his shadow show, rifle raised. Last chance to turn around. For a moment, the world froze. Then the rider spat into the snow. "We'll be back," with more men. Hooves pounded away, swallowed by the cold air. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was a fuse lit, burning toward war. Nia emerged, clutching the revolver with both shaking hands. "They know," she whispered. Her voice wasn't breaking from fear, it was hard with anger. "I won't go with them alive." Graham placed his hand gently over hers, lowering the gun. "And you won't have to fight alone." Her eyes locked onto his. "Why risk everything?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because I'd rather die fighting for something that matters than live doing nothing." She slowly leaned her forehead against his chest, her breath trembling but steadying in his warmth. He rested his hand against the back of her head, careful, protective, choosing this moment over every mistake he'd made in the past. "We stay ready," he said quietly. "They come again, we finish this." Outside, the sun dropped behind the hills, shadows rising like a warning. Inside the ranch house, two hearts beat with the same resolve. The storm of men was coming, and Graham Calder would be the one to meet it head-on, because Nia was no longer running, and neither was he. Morning arrived, muted and pale, a thin sun barely warming the frozen air. Graham was already awake, checking the rifle again, checking the windows, checking the horizon. He expected movement, expected gun, smoke on the wind, expected trouble. Nia sat at the edge of the bed, her injured leg wrapped tight and her hands clasped together like she was preparing her mind for what was coming. There was no fear left in her face, only resolve. Last night changed them both. Running wasn't an option anymore. This was where they made their stand. "You sure you can move well enough?" Graham asked. She stood to show him. Her stance had steadied. Pain still lived behind her eyes, but her strength was clear. "I stay on my feet until it's done," she said. He nodded once, believing her. They had a simple plan: barricade the doors, take positions where they could defend without being exposed, and if the fight came inside, they'd fight together. Graham had also tied off the rear stable door. If someone tried sneaking behind the barn, he would hear the latch break. They sat down briefly to eat bread and leftover beans. Nia thanked him, not for the meal, but for something bigger. "You gave me back my life," she said softly. Graham shook his head. "You gave yourself that. I'm just making damn sure no one takes it again." Nia looked at him carefully, like she wanted to say something deeper, but didn't know if she had permission. Before she could try, the distant stomp of hooves cut the silence. Graham moved to the window. 3 riders, maybe 4 further back. They were armed, confident, coming straight for the ranch house. "They're here," Graham said, voice steady as iron. Nia pulled the revolver close to her chest. Her breathing changed, not panic but readiness. Graham positioned himself behind the overturned kitchen table he'd set as cover, rifle aimed at the door. Hoofs stopped outside. Boots hit the ground. Then came the voice, louder, angrier. "Calder, you got something that don't belong to you. We take her now, you get to keep breathing." Graham didn't bother replying with politeness. "You come through that door, you die." A harsh laugh followed. "One woman ain't worth dying for. Rancher." Graham answered without pause, loud enough for everyone, including Nia, to hear clearly. "She's worth everything." That changed the air. Nia's eyes glistened, but her grip tightened on the pistol. She believed him. The first shot blew splinters from a door. Graham returned fire instantly. One rider toppled from his horse with a sharp cry. The others cursed, ducked behind the troughs. Another rushed the window. Graham fired again, glass shattering. A thud followed. Silence broke into groans and swearing. Nia kept her revolver ready, eyes sharp as she watched the back door, making sure no one slipped inside. She wasn't frozen in fear. She was part of the fight. 2 more riders tried flanking toward the barn. Graham spotted them through the side window. "Stay here," he ordered. "No," she said quickly. "We end this together." Graham didn't argue. He handed her a second belt of bullets. They slipped out the back, boots crunching softly through snow. The barn provided cover. Graham took one side, Nia the other. The first man rounded the barn corner too fast. Graham fired once, a clean shot. The second man heard it and spun around, right into Nia's aim. Her shot cracked through the air, straight and true. The man hit the snow hard. She froze for half a heartbeat, staring at what she had done, choosing her life over his. Graham stepped up beside her, grounding her. He would not have hesitated, he said. She nodded once, firm. Silence settled again, thicker this time. Graham waited, pulse steady now. When no more movement came, he scanned the property one final time. Only still bodies and a quiet morning remained. They had won. They walked back inside together. Graham set the rifle down and let out a long breath, the kind a man takes when a promise is kept. Nia leaned against the table, adrenaline draining fast, leaving her exhausted but alive. "It's over," she asked. "It's over," he confirmed. She stared at the floor for a moment, then looked up and met his eyes. "You risked your life. For me." Graham stepped closer, voice rough with honesty. "You're not a burden, Nia. You're not a problem to be solved. You're someone I want here." Her breath caught. "Why?" He didn't flinch, because when I found you, I thought I was just saving someone. But you're saving me right back. That broke whatever wall was left between them. Nia reached up and cupped his cheek with her hand. Light, careful, like she was still learning what gentle felt like. Graham leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, warm, certain real. Not a kiss from desperation or fear. A kiss that promised a future. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. I want to stay, not just because I need safety, because I choose you. His voice came quiet and deep. Then stay. Stay for good. Nia smiled, small but full, a smile born from survival and finally belonging.